All right, welcome. There's a report from David Pagnotta that the Bruins and the Blue Jackets currently have a deal in place for the Bruins to acquire defenseman Vladislav Gavrikov. Gavrikov, top four D man with the Blue Jackets, solid defensive defenseman. A little bit of offense there, but mostly defense. Currently carries a cap hit of $2.8 million. Thus, the reason the deal hasn't been completed yet, because the Bruins only have $1 million in cap space. They recently reactivated Jake DeBrusk from the LTIR, long-term injury reserve, which decreased their total amount of cap space available. So the Bruins need to move out some money to another team, dump a contract, in order to acquire Gavrikov. Let's talk about it. Gavrikov, unrestricted free agent at the end of this year. The Bruins are likely going to spend decent money to acquire this guy. A lot of teams have been calling with interest in this defenseman. Bruins seem to be the top bidder. It'd be nice if the Bruins re-signed him to some type of extension. Fingers crossed, hopefully he's not just a rental player. Hopefully he's not just a guy to play 20 games and maybe the playoffs, hopefully, if he remains healthy and goes from there. He's been historically healthy throughout his career, which is great news. But let's talk about it. He's a left shot defenseman, 27 years old, 6'3", 221 pounds. So he's big. He's a big guy, which is good. The Bruins need big physical guys in their lineup. Purely defense, though. 52 games played this season, 3 goals, 7 assists, 10 total points. He's a -8 on the season, which, given where the Blue Jackets are in the standings, it's really not that bad of a number. But overall, 22 minutes, 20 seconds time on ice this year. Top 4 D-man numbers. Last year, he was like 3 seconds less at like 22-17 time on ice or something. Not too bad. But how would he fit into the Bruins lineup? Okay, let's talk about that. And I know these are a little off from what Bruins have been putting on the ice recently. I got Lindholm, McAvoy on that top line. Recently, I guess it's been well over a week. Grzelcyk's been playing on that top line with McAvoy. Lindholm has been playing on the second line with Brandon Carlo. I don't think it's worked. I don't think it's worked out very well. There's clearly their defense clearly with these two lines aren't as efficient as they were when they were playing lines like this. I think Lindholm, McAvoy go back on the same line, especially for the playoffs. Grzelcyk, Carlo, probably the second line, and you got Forbert, Clifton playing well on that third line. Depth, and I'm talking about guys that have spent fairly significant time in the NHL throughout their careers. And Zaboral probably being the least, tenure. Zaboral's still kind of young, drafted the same time as Jake DeBrusk. But you got Zaboral, he's an NHL caliber depth defenseman. You got Mike Riley, who spent his really the entire season in the AHL in Providence. Ton of experience there. You got Anton Strawman, who's older but still a serviceable NHL defenseman. You got Connor Carrick, who is definitely a depth defenseman. He's someone you can waive and bring down to the AHL and call up if you need him. Kind of like a Jared Tenorti type. He's made his way around the league. And then I got kind of this down here because technically, if you need to call someone up from the AHL, you also have Jack Ashawn and you have Wolf. Both of these guys have played in a Bruins uniform. Wolf is more of a depth defenseman, if that at that point, maybe a top 2 AHL pairing kind of guy. Jack Ashawn, still a youngish prospect, still developing. We'll see if he ever gets to an NHL level on a consistent basis. But the issue is where would Gavrikov slide into this, and who are you going to scratch? That's kind of where it gets a little difficult. So Gavrikov used to playing top 4 minutes. The hockey guy reported that he would be surprised if Gavrikov played top 4 minutes in Boston. He'd probably slot into the 5 or 6 spot on defense, which could very well happen. At this point, where he'll slot into lineup is purely speculation until the Bruins actually acquire him and until Jim Montgomery is forced to figure out where he's going to slot in the lineup and forced to figure out who's going or who's getting waived or whatever. Roster moves, right? I would probably slot him in on the second line next to Brandon Carlo. You got Lindholm, you got McAvoy. They can provide some type of offense, which is great. but they're both pretty solid defensively. You got Grizzlick, who doesn't provide a whole lot of offense at this point. There's a lot of focus earlier on in his career to be more of a two-way, maybe offensive defenseman, because he's got great edge work. He skates very well. He's got a decent shot, but he just hasn't put up the points and he hasn't necessarily finished. Carlo's a good defensive defenseman. This year, he's been playing more offense than I think his game allows him to, and he's been caught struggling to return to the defensive zone, leaving him out of position, leaving him on the ice for more goals against. I think if he goes back to basics or is paired with more of a defensive defenseman than Matt Grizzlick, Carlo can either be more defensive or he can work on his offensive game and drive into the zone and create more scoring chances. Carlo is also a very good skater. He's a tall dude, but he's a very good skater. I don't think he gets enough credit for his skating ability. Matt Grizzlick, though, is sometimes a defensive liability. It just is what it is. I don't see Matt Grizzlick getting moved. He would probably be my first choice to move off of this blue line. Partly because he makes $3.7 million against the cap. You can trade him. He's not worthless on the market. He's got some value and a decent cap for a team looking for more defensive defensemen, right? But definitely a defensive liability at times. It is what it is. He's a homegrown guy. Was he from Charlestown or something? I don't see Don Sweeney trading him. I think Don Sweeney loves Matt Grizzlick. Again, you never know, though, and this is kind of where the speculation part gets into play. Forbort, you can't really scratch. He is one of the best penalty killers in the league. We hear Jack Edwards and all his stats about how the penalty kill is with Forbort and without Forbort. With Forbort in the lineup, I don't see him not being a regular in this lineup. Connor Clifton, in my opinion, has played much more sound hockey than Matt Grizzlick. I don't think Connor Clifton should be the one to get cut. He's an unrestricted free agent. He's at the end of the season. He's on a fairly cheap contract. He's $1 million for, a very, very serviceable, solid top six defensive player. So what do? You're not going to cut Lindholm and McAvoy. Both, have made cases to be in the Norris conversation this year. Carlo is a very good defensive defenseman. He just needs a decent partner, and I don't think Matt Grizzlick is the partner for either McAvoy or Brandon Carlo. So what's the solution? Gavrikov. Great, but what do you do with Matt Grizzlick? So that's my take. Honestly, what I think will happen with Jim Montgomery is Gavrikov will slide in for Connor Clifton. Clifton will often end up being a healthy scratch come playoff time, and he'll be gone in the offseason because that's usually what happens when you start scratching a guy when you're trying to make a push for the Stanley Cup in the playoffs. If they're a healthy scratch, they're an unrestricted free agent in just like a month or so, they're more likely than not leaving, which is rough because Clifton is one of those guys you can re-sign at a pretty reasonable rate, and he's going to play above his contract. He's played well above his contract this year. Even if you signed him for like $2 million, which he may or may not even go for that much in unrestricted free agency. That's not a bad price for a consistent NHL level defenseman. It isn't. But they have all this depth. You got to start moving some of these defensive players. You got Zaboro, who makes a little over $1 million. You got Riley, who makes $3 million. You got Anton Strawman. I think he's on $1 million, and Connor Carrick. Let's see, I don't know, somewhere around league minimum. But you got a lot of money tied up already that's not playing. You got about $5 million here. You got Mike Riley signed through next year. He would probably be ideally the best option to trade. But I don't know if there's a market out for him. I think you have to give up some pretty substantial assets to dump Mike Riley's contract off to a team. And it's unlikely that Columbus is going to accept that contract. Mike Riley signed through next year, so it's not just an unrestricted free agent type cap move. But Columbus is also fairly strapped for cap space going into next season as well. So there's a bit of an issue here. You kind of have to find a third party to dump off a contract. Now, there's a lot of speculation that the guy on the move is going to be Craig Smith. Um, there's probably going to be some type of market for Craig Smith. Probably not going to be much of a return, if anything. More likely than not, you're going to have to give up an asset to move Craig Smith's contract. He's been scratched, he's been waived and cleared this year. He's played decently in the lineup. He's also played next to guys like Bergeron and Marchand in the lineup at times. Um, and most guys that play on that line look pretty solid. Just to throw that out there. So Craig Smith is more likely than not the guy on the move. Smith also an expiring contract this offseason, likely gone after this season is completed. So we'll see what happens. It's interesting. I don't know if this is the right move. It depends. There's still some factors at play for the Bruins. But I think if you can slot Gavrikov in where Grzelcyk is, and this is just opinion, I think this defense becomes probably one of the best defensive cores in the entire league, if not the best. Now I don't want to say the best because you can always make an argument for another team. You can always make an argument like if another defensive core is more offensively minded than this or defensively minded. Like it is what it is, so it's always a discussion. But nonetheless, with Gavrikov, it's already a solid D, and you're just adding to it. You're making it better. However, you got a lot of D-men. My concern, if I was Don Sweeney, would be finding another top 9 forward, specifically a winger, or a future center guy that can slot in as your 1 or 2 center for next year. You don't have anyone currently that can slot into that role. Zacha is not going to cut it there. His numbers on that second line are comparable to Eric Halla's from last year. The Coyle trial on the second line didn't work, right? Trent Frederick, not a second or first line center option. So there's some concerns that need to be addressed, and it's understandable if the Bruins aren't going to look at that specifically going into the playoffs. That might be more of an off-season concern. But you're already strapped for cash. So if you're going to make a move and you're going to assume more cap space, like Gavrikov, and extend him, who's going to get a pay raise, a fairly significant pay raise. It's not going to be like a Lindholm pay raise, but you're talking like $4.5 million. He's gonna see in annual average value. That's cap space you could be spending on addressing your forward needs, which are going to be extremely prevalent this offseason and into next year. And there's not a whole lot of forward depth, to be honest, on the Bruins. They have a lot of defensive depth. They don't have a lot of forward depth. So there's also that. Let me know what you guys think. You like Gavrikov coming to the Bruins? Do you agree with this move? Do you disagree? Where do you see him slotting in if this move is made? Would you rather the Bruins get a forward or a defenseman? Do you like Gavrikov? Would you rather they spend a little more and get somebody like Chychrun? I don't know what the cost is for Gavrikov, what it's going to be. But I'm anticipating the Bruins' first-round pick is gone, which, fine. Like, it's understandable. It's going to be a late first-round pick, hopefully. Fingers crossed for the Bruins fans. You're probably going to have to give up an asset to or a prospect. Might be John Beecher, which, honestly, fine. He doesn't look like he's developing like you want a first-rounder to develop. Anyway, if you have to trade Fabian Lysell and a first-round pick, or really just Fabian Lysell in general for Gavrikov, do you like the deal? Because personally, I don't like that at all. That's a story for another time. Let me know what you guys think. I appreciate you guys for watching. I'll be here if the news breaks, if it ever breaks, when it breaks. I'll be here. I'll be reporting on it. So take care, guys. Thanks a ton.